Hello, it's Connor here for day 88 of meditation, and today we're going to talk about exposure and avoidance in regards to social anxiety and other anxieties as well. So anxiety is essentially a fear response within oneself towards a threat or a perceived threat, most likely in this day and age a perceived threat, and avoidance is essentially avoiding exposure to the threat so that we may lessen our fear response to it, or avoid the situation to escape the fear involved in that situation. In regards to social anxiety, this could be having to give a speech or giving a talk, and we find a way out of giving that talk due to the fear response it stimulates in our body. We don't want to feel that. We fear it, we amplify it, and we want to escape that situation. The problem with this is avoidance is a key component to maintaining anxiety. So it's kind of twisted in that sense. So avoiding a situation, it will give short-term relief, but that fear response when encountering that situation again will be more amplified because you avoided it last time. Essentially, the more you avoid something, the larger this fear response to it grows, and that is why we just keep on avoiding, because our fear continues to develop and those situations continue to be more fearsome, so we continue to avoid, therefore we maintain our social anxiety. Exposure is exposing yourself to those perceived fear invoking situations, and exposure is scary for a lot of people, as it should be, or it shouldn't be, but it should be, because essentially exposure is confronting those events which we perceive as fearful or anxiety provoking. And exposure works on the foundation of habituation, which means the more we expose ourselves to something, the more we get used to it, and the less our fear response is stimulated, because we are habituating ourselves to the environment. Habituation is explained by being so used to something that it no longer impacts you. It's a habit you perform. We are habituated to this world because the world we see before us, none of it's out of the blue. We're habituated to it, we're used to it, and we know how to navigate it. Though this habituation comes from just being used to the environments you're in. If we were in a completely different universe, different planet, and we were born on on this crazy planet with alien species, and we're part of those aliens, we'd naturally be habituated to that because that's what we're used to, that's what we know. So when it comes to exposure, it's habituating yourself to those fear-provoking sensations, and you continue to expose yourself until that fear response is no longer there and the environment that you're in is a natural environment for you to be in. It was stated that literally exposure alone, there's a lot more to it, there's a lot of patterns of thought and everything which may need recorrelating, which we'll delve into, but exposure is key, because with just exposure alone, continual exposure, instead of using avoidance to avoid a situation, we expose ourselves to the situation on a continual basis to the point it becomes habituated to us, normal for us. Through exposure alone, it is stated, exposure alone, without any, mindfulness, anything, is already going to decrease your anxiety. And it kind of comes down to the value you place on things, because there's two ways to go about anxiety, and one is we continue to avoid, and we never navigate this fear response we have, and we will always fear those events which we stimulate anxiety in. Or we can place value on, overcoming, on ourselves and being able to navigate environments and being able to navigate our fears more easily. When we place our value on that, then exposure is the first step. There's rewiring the mind, but exposure, attempt to stop. Notice when you're avoiding situations, and avoidance is smart. It'll tell you all sorts of things. It'll tell you reasons why to avoid a situation, when deep down you'd know when it's anxiety that is making you avoid those situations. So expose yourself to those situations and sit with the anxiety, because over time it will decrease. You don't need to be perfect at any stage in life, really, but just expose yourself to the environment, And it doesn't matter how anxious you are. We'll tell you tips about how to get through anxiety in future, but exposure is an essential step according to CBT, so that these environments we perceive as stressful can become a normal place for us. So it's kind of the value you place on things or on yourself. If we place value on short-term satisfaction and avoiding these fear-provoking situations, then we are going to find that short-term relief, but we will never overcome that fear response. We will never work through anxiety. We'll rather just maintain it throughout the course of our life and try and avoid it where we can, so that we're not stressing out and fearful. If you place value on wanting to overcome a fear response, wanting to overcome anxiety, then it is short-term distress. I know that's scary for people, short-term distress, but long-term completely rid of anxiety, for the most part, or completely diminished fear response to anxiety. So it's either short-term gain, long-term no improvements, probably less improvements, or short-term distress, confronting that fear response and being with it, sitting with it, and allowing that to do its job on its own. The more we sit with it, the more we get used to it, the more we get used to those environments, and naturally the more our fear response to those environments and our anxiety response diminishes over time with exposure. So attempt not to avoid environments that you fear, attempt to expose yourself and get used to them. And this just takes being in them. If this comes to anything you feel anxious about, unless it's actually dangerous, but anything you feel anxious about, just start exposing yourself. Notice the fear response. Notice when you attempt to avoid those fear responses through procrastination, through all sorts of stuff, and work to overcome or expose yourself so that you may overcome that fear response. We will delve into, additional strategies to, help you actually in these environments going forward, such as mindfulness and stuff, and also the actual processes in your mind which are self-criticizing, self-doubting, and also causing an amplified state of fear and also an amplified state of avoidance and self-depreciating as well. So yeah, that's a start, and hopefully you got something out of it. If you're fearing something and you value overcoming that situation, then attempt to start putting yourself through those little bits of habituation, those little bits of distress, which are going to alleviate that pain, that fear over time, until it disappears, and then you'll be like, fuck yes, I'm so glad I did that back in the day. Anyway, take care people. See ya.